This is the Rings of Power podcast on TV Podcast Industries. This time we're talking about the Rings of Power, episode 5, Partings.
So the fate of the entire elven race is in my hands.
So it would appear.
Say that again.
The fate of the entire elven race is in your hands.
Whose hands?
Yours.
Welcome back, fellow ringers, to the Rings of Power podcast on TV Podcast Industries. We are talking about episode 5 of the Rings of Power, Partings. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hello there, fellow ringers. Welcome back. I'm one of your other hosts, John.
Doing double duty this week on our Rings of Power podcast as we've just returned from holiday. So got to see 2 episodes this week in 1 week. That's kind of awesome, isn't it?
Yeah, it was really good, actually.
Yeah, I think because we watched the epic of all 3 Hobbit movies in the last couple of weeks before we went on holidays, I'm kind of expecting all the episodes to be really long. And this one was about an hour and 15 minutes on its own.
Yeah, I think they both were. I mean, you really do feel like you're getting a big slice of cake with these episodes,
yeah.
You know, and not just because of the epicness of them, but you know, there's a lot of story being told here.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying it.
I think my notes are running to like 3 or 4 pages for every episode of Rings of Power, which I'm really enjoying. Again, it's just one of those things about this universe. It's so deep with massive races of people, loads of cast members. It's really, really good.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, half the problem coming back after a break for a week and a half is remembering the names. It's like, who's that again?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I can't pronounce it. Okay, grand. But once you get back into it, it's just picking up where you left off.
Exactly.
So, really have been enjoying these episodes of Rings of Power.
Good stuff. Hope you've been enjoying them as well, fellow ringers. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, make sure you go to the website at tvpodcastindustries.com, where you can find podcasts for every single show that we're covering on TV Podcast Industries. You can subscribe over there on any good or evil podcast catcher of your choice. You can also email us with your thoughts about any of the shows that we're covering to feedback at tvpodcastindustries.com, or pop on over to our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries, where we have a spoiler post up for everything that we're covering as well.
Yeah. Good stuff. Let us get into our spoiler-filled chit-chat about episode 5 of the Rings of Power, Partings. Derek, what are some of the episode details for episode 5?
Well, this show, of course, is based on The Lord of the Rings and the appendices by Professor J.R.R. Tolkien. The showrunners for the show and executive producers are J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay. This episode was directed once again by Wayne Shi Yip. Episode 5 of the show was written by Justin Doble, who wrote episode 3 as well.
Ah, excellent stuff. Yeah, a returning writer.
Exactly. And John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your synopsis for episode 5, Partings?
Sure. While protecting Nori and the other Harfoots from a wolf pack, the stranger's use of magic injures his own arm. He heals it using conjured ice. As Nori attempts to help him, she is accidentally fused to him by the ice. Panicked, she attempts to struggle free and is flung away from him as she manages to free herself from the icy hold. Frightened, she flees from the stranger. In Númenor, Galadriel convinces Halbrand to join the expedition to Middle-earth after retelling her battles and losses against Sauron. At the same time, Kemen, son of Pharazôn, attempts to destroy the expedition ships, believing Galadriel and Míriel will take the fall and allow Pharazôn to rise to power with the people's support. However, he is caught by Isildur, who is rewarded with a spot on the expedition crew. In Lindon, Gil-galad reveals to Elrond his knowledge of and intention to use the dwarvish mithril to extend the existence of the elves in Middle-earth, as their life force is diminishing. Elrond admits this discovery to Prince Durin, his friend, and they return to Khazad-dûm to try and convince King Durin III that in his hands lies the very existence of elf-kind in this world. In the Southlands, half of the townspeople cave into Adda's demand and join him, believing him to be Sauron. Theo shows the broken sword to Arondir, who realizes it is a key to help warp the Southlands into Sauron's realm of evil and darkness.
Ooh.
With the watchtower at Ostirith now the target for the oncoming Orc army headed by Adar, the remaining townspeople prepare for battle against the approaching army, and they light the watchtower's beacon to signal for help.
Another episode with lots and lots going on, but let's discuss these tales of Middle-earth with our first tale from episode 5. Let's talk about Nori to begin with, and the Harfoots. It's just a small scene, but because we didn't see them last episode, let's have a quick chat about what's going on with them. We know they were put at the back of the pack for the migrating Harfoots, and we get a little bit more information about what happens with them. They move every season to a different location that's better suited and has more food, which I really like. You know, they are nomadic as a tribe, yes. So I love learning a little bit more about why they move to different locations. This idea that you move to one place that has strawberries during the summertime, and then you move to somewhere that has more winter fruits during the winter period. That's fully able to support your whole troop or tribe. But interestingly, we only see Nori and Poppy and Nori's family and the stranger here, so they are quite far behind the rest of the caravan. It seems
they are. I loved how they depicted that migration with the map. Yeah, in particular, I really like seeing like the different parts of Middle-earth as we went with this migration through the map. In particular, the Grey Marshes, which we see in the Two Towers that Frodo and Samwise Gamgee have to navigate with all the dead elven forces that are in there.
The Grey Marshes become the Dead Marshes, basically.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Interesting.
I may be wrong there, but I think so.
But it did feel like that kind of place, yeah.
Yeah, it really did. It's kind of like, pre-dead elves in it.
Yeah.
So I really liked how that was depicted.
Yeah, I love that it was done to that tune that was sung by Poppy, the kind of history of her family's migration sung to the rest of them to kind of encourage them all along. I thought that was beautiful. And that then repeated at the end of the episode, the full orchestral version of it done at the end of the episode. It felt really epic for this group of Harfoots. They're the smallest people in this world, and their big travel.
I even like that, once they've stopped, we see the stranger Nori learning words, or Nori teaching the stranger different words, one of them being migration. Mm-hmm. And of course, maybe for some people slightly on the nose, but, the words of peril or good coming into it, whether, the stranger believing that maybe he is peril because of what happened with the fireflies that we saw in the early episode. But Nori being convinced, no, you're good, and teaching him that as well. So
yes, but is he?
Exactly. Well, that's the interesting thing, because there isn't, even though we do get the Harfoots, there isn't a great, we don't come back to them after we have the stranger protecting Poppy, Nori, and one of the elder women from the Harfoots, from the wolves.
Yes, of course, we do see the rest of the Harfoots because they went through the forests. Yes. I almost forgot about that.
And there's warnings here as well that the forests are very bare for this time of year as they're migrating, and people are getting hungry with little food. And you have this wolf chase of, as I say, of Nori and Poppy, and another one of the village elders.
That's the one that keeps trying to throw them out, isn't it?
Yes, protected.
Malva. Yeah.
In the end, and helped by the stranger, who seemingly gets injured in the process. And you have this, really interesting sort of way that he puts his hand in water and then freezes it and his arm, and that seemingly is either restoring or doing something.
Creating his own private ice bath.
Yeah, but it's in some kind of trance. Nori gets caught as she puts her hand on his forearm as the ice extends, and it is effectively trapped there, and she's trying to get it out because is it going to go over all her body or something? She's panicking, and I don't quite know what happens, whether she pulls it out or whether it's because of what she's doing. It's something coming from the stranger, but she's flung away from him. And immediately her whole kind of attitude, or at least changes towards the stranger. She's kind of cowering.
Well, suddenly she's scared of him.
Yeah, she's suddenly scared of him and sort of doesn't stay with him, runs away from him as he's coming towards her. And you get that great moment where the trees are creaking, sort of almost bending towards him as he looks after her, as she runs away, you know? So it really, again, I guess it's just still throwing doubt on the stranger as to who he is, and why he's fallen in a meteor to Middle-earth. And we get another, we see here people, I don't know, white witches or of some description, or wizards coming to the place where the stranger, where the meteorite had fallen to Middle-earth.
Yes, somebody else has discovered the location. Like we saw that in the first episode when the stranger's meteor came to Earth. We saw that everybody in Middle-earth, all our main characters anyway, and the Ents, were all looking up, seeing this. So it's something that was visible all across Middle-earth. Yeah. And this completely new group, I think. They don't look like the elves. They look a bit more evil than that, but look a bit darker. But
a lot more frownier.
Yes.
Kind of lots of frowns going on from the lead
Eminem
witch.
Yeah.
Or Eminem, yeah.
The blonde-haired shaved one looked a bit like Eminem. Didn't look very happy. Maybe it was just a tough trip to get there.
That's it. Who are they? What are they doing? Friend or foe?
Absolutely.
Answers on a postcard, I guess.
I guess we're going to see more of them in the future, but interesting to see somebody else has gone and found this location where the stranger sat down. But of course, Nori's going to be starting to question her complete belief that the stranger is good, because she's been able to kind of play off everything that's happened. The fire that didn't burn her. Well, that was a cause from the meteor. It wasn't really the stranger that did that. The fireflies that burnt out in the sky. Well, that could have been an accident. She knows she can't even talk at the moment. He hasn't got much language. So maybe that was just a learning process. The power that he uses to stop the wolves, he was defending them. So that's something good, right? But now this moment of accidentally almost killing Nori because he's in the trance and she gets connected to him by the ice. That's something that you can't deny, that's quite dangerous, that she could have died in that moment.
Yeah, it's like her instinct, her gut feeling towards him changed in that instant. Whether there's some kind of connection, who knows?
Maybe, but it seems like danger is here.
Yeah, exactly.
So what did you think of the power from the stranger knocking away the wolves? That really reminded me of Gandalf's "Thou shalt not pass" kind of banging the ground to release this kind of this pushing power.
Well, it really did. It just without the staff, effectively.
Maybe that's why Gandalf never hurt his arm like the stranger did.
Yeah, exactly. But it really did feel reminiscent of that. Again, another reason to doubt possibly Nori's instincts, or so. Yeah, I guess the jury's still out as to whether the stranger is friend or foe as well. Exactly. So there's still a lot to discover here. But I like how it's teasing that. I like how it's not just making it one or the other at this stage. There's a lot of time to play with that grey area, and part of that came with the discussions on the different words. Nori's interaction with him. So. The only thing I was surprised is that we actually didn't see the Harfoots again after that incident. Yeah. I was expecting something to happen later in the episode, and it never did. So I have a feeling that potentially it could be quite big, in that we'll get it in the next episode, and maybe a bit more time with it to just kind of digest it and understand what's going on here.
Yeah.
Because there was also a lot of other stuff going on in this episode.
There certainly was. We move on to another tale from this episode. What do you want to go for tale number 2, John? We go to the Southlanders, we go to Númenor, we go to Khazad-dûm, John.
I think we should go... I think tale number 2 should definitely be Elrond's struggle to stay true to his oath.
Ooh, yes.
I really enjoyed this, to be honest, because I think at its heart, there was this revelation to Elrond as well from Gil-galad, and what he knew about the Mithril. This is the thing. It's that him and Celebrimbor both knew of it and didn't bring him into their circle of trust. And so this was new information to him, and totally used him, but ultimately stood his ground to some extent with Gil-galad. I loved how Gil-galad effectively reveals how Mithril formed within the mountain on Khazad-dûm.
Yeah, I was a little confused about the location, though, I must admit. And as I say, not a Tolkien scholar, but they're in Khazad-dûm, that's where the mines are, and they said this battle between the elfin warrior and the Balrog took place on a tree above the Misty Mountain, which I thought was where the other seat of power was. I didn't think the two of those locations were the same place, Khazad-dûm and the Misty Mountain.
But he talks about how the roots, so this whole event, which called forth the light of the Valar in order to protect the elf warrior from the Balrog, one of Morgoth's, probably with the exception of Sauron, one of his main beasts,
probably
most powerful beasts. That
it's cool to see Balrog there actually. But
the extension of the Mithril from the tree went far and wide. Right. So I mean, I'm guessing it's that, but I really enjoyed this story of where Mithril, its provenance, effectively. It's the light of lost Cimmerils. And it was forged from this battle of a pure elf and a Morgoth Balrog. But
very cool.
It's really good, but
didn't it feel like something from Norse mythology? Like it felt
like
that,
it really
that kind of
did.
thing, how you explain the stars or how you explain the moon or something.
It really did. It really felt weighty. It felt old, an old tale. But the tension that this brings between Elrond and Gil-galad, you lied to me about the intention of uniting dwarves and elves, and that then the next reveal that the light of the Eldir is leaving the trees, and we saw this earlier on in one of the episodes where it's almost like a dark blight on the leaves.
That's right.
From one of the trees around Linden, and as a result of this, that the power of elves is diminishing, their life force, and this will ultimately mean that they will have to leave Middle Earth, or
crumple and die and be lost to history.
Yes, exactly. And darkness will fall. So actually huge stakes here for the race of elves. But I really like the fact that Elrond is insistent to keep the secret, to keep the oath that he promised, that was entrusted to him by Durin. And ultimately, you're going, well, Elrond's got a really big decision here. It's the oath to Durin or save Elfkind. And he simply is honest and truthful with Durin about what happened. To some extent, I say that in that he says he's lied, but he doesn't say that he was also misled in this. He protects Gil-galad while also explaining it to Durin, I guess by extension, Gil-galad, Celebrimbor also will know of this, to some extent.
We see Gil-galad looking on while they're having the discussion. But it is a really interesting one. It's almost like Elrond's kind of admitting he is at fault here because they used him and his relationship with Durin to get the information that they wanted, even though he wasn't aware of it. Elrond's the kind of person that is sensitive to this and saying, well, they basically used my friendship with you, but is taking some responsibility for that. He's not blaming Gil-galad and Celebrimbor. He's actually saying, I knew of this. I came to you for this reason. Speaking of lies, absolutely loved the Durin taking the massive stone table back from the elves.
Exactly.
Because I truly believed it. I thought this was another reveal of the history of the dwarves. We've had these great moments throughout the last few episodes of learning stuff about their history, and I was going, wow, how awful of the elves to take the headstone stone of the dwarves and make a table out of it, you know. And then they give him back the table, and it turns out he just needed a new table for Disa.
It was really. It was a nice little touch.
Yeah. And also him turning the knife with Elrond, and effectively when Elrond's saying the entirety of the elven race is in your hands. And he goes, well, whose hands is it in? Is it the entirety of the elven race? Could you repeat that again?
Say that again, exactly. No, nice little gag that. Yeah. But again, it just really underscores and reiterates the friendship that they have, in the sense that, you know, whether Durin knows it or not, you know, they are friends, and there are other things given their station. He is a prince, and the next king of the dwarves. Elrond is high up in the Elven King's, you know, council.
Yes.
So I think, you know, it's coming at it from that perspective as well, that their friendship is in a place that is very mutual. It's based on respect, but, you know, there are things to work out between the dwarves and the elves, ultimately. Yeah.
It might get them nowhere, because they still got to go and convince King Durin to understand and to accept that this deep seam of riches that they've just discovered for the entirety of saving the dwarven race, or making them at least very, very rich, may have to be handed over. Because if you heard from Celebrimbor, he says, they will need all of it. They will need every single piece of mithril that they can get their hands on. And maybe if enough of them have this armor that will allow them to bring back the light and keep them alive for longer, will give them this long life. And that's even a might work. They need to get everything to be able to give them a chance to live on. So interesting.
Yeah, interesting. Absolutely. But again, I'm really enjoying this story, this part of this arc of the story being told through Elrond and Durin's friendship. I think it really adds a personal layer and just allows for characterization around this story, or, you know, of the two of them, of Disa and the others involved, like Celebrimbor and Gil-galad, within this wider story.
Exactly.
You know, it's really good.
Isn't it? They've just done such a great job on this show. And again, you're talking about one season of one story arc that they're delivering here on Prime Video with these 8 episodes in this first season. So it's interesting that while the length of time of this is probably equal to The Lord of the Rings, you're talking about a much more confined story being told, so that allows them to give even more time over to characterization and spending time with these races and with these people, and learning more about them than you would have in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, because you only had a certain amount of time with them. And that was one of the criticisms I know from a lot of people who read the books. There's so much time spent with the individual characters and learning who they are. But when you've got a movie, you may have a character that's got 20 pages in Lord of the Rings who gets one line on screen. You're supposed to guess who they are from that one line. Whereas here we're getting lots of time, with all these characters done, really well. Really enjoyed this one.
Yeah.
Is that it for tale number 2, John?
Yes. Yeah. Let's move on to tale number 3, the split of the Southlanders.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, there's a lot here, actually. Because we see that half of the Southlanders go to plead fealty to Adar, after his message, was delivered.
Yes.
And half of them, remain within the watchtower of Estirith, which I was assuming it was an elf watchtower. without really looking at the architecture of it, which is quite clearly not elven.
Yes.
But that it is a former orc or Southlander human tower
Yeah.
during the Morgoth War, the Great War, which then the elves have reused to as this watchtower to watch over the humans in the Southlands. So,
exactly.
but from that is, I guess, one of the big sort of points that opens up here as to how Mordor will be created, potentially.
Yeah.
And connects back to Adar saying, I'm not a god. Well, not yet.
Yeah.
In terms of creation of this land for Sauron. Again, we still don't quite know Adar's relationship with Sauron, if any. I mean,
True.
There's part of me that's still thinking that actually he seems to be working under his own agency, but that's mainly because we haven't seen him, with a Palanthea talking to Sauron or,
picking up the phone. Yeah.
Well, exactly. Some kind of Middle-earth phone-like, device.
Yeah.
That's not to say he's not working off instructions.
Although it felt like he was a little bit offended by Waldreg calling him Sauron.
Yes, for sure.
Because he tasks him with killing Rowan the minute he's told that he's there to follow Sauron, or whoever you are. We're here to bow down to you, or whatever, I guess. He kind of was backtracking quite a bit, Waldreg, when he saw the power of Adar and how much he offended him by calling him Sauron. He was going, uh-oh, maybe I've made a bit of a mistake here.
Yeah, although I felt sorry for Rowan as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, we didn't see him get killed.
We didn't.
But it looked quite a strong possibility.
It felt like this is a 7+ show. The rating on it is really 7 and above. So I think when things are being left to your imagination on this show, it is possible that characters have died.
Well, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
I definitely thought he was a goner, but
I felt like he's a character that's had a few lines in the episodes, and some people were speculating that maybe he was Sauron. At one point that Theo's
not
friend
anymore, he ain't.
Rowan was Sauron, but it doesn't seem like it. But the one thing I suppose about this whole idea where the key to opening up Mordor in the Southlands is here at the Watchtower of Ostrith. I know we'll get more of it in the future, but I'm just not too sure I understood it from what happened on screen here without Undir explaining and seeing this thing that he's seen for the last 100 years, this statue that seems to be holding a similar blade to the one that Theo has been carrying. It seems to have the mask of Sauron. Would that be right? The kind of the metal mask that we've seen Sauron have in the future. It seems to have that, and it seems to have this hilt of a sword that Theo is now carrying. I wasn't sure what he was saying, whether he was saying, if you stick the sword in this statue, then it will suddenly
that's what I
create Mordor here.
That's how I took it. I thought that
or is this a statue to what will happen in the future? Is that somebody will
and I think
unite the two together?
I don't know for sure, but ultimately that's why we hear Adar being told that the tunnels are complete, and he says bring forward the legions, and we see the orc army that he has moving up towards the watchtower, and so it feels like at this tower there is a dark magic or some kind of altar or that will enable and is connected to the hilt in order to do and create the dark realm of Mordor. So to me it felt like after Theo had shown Arondir the hilt, I think Arondir says, that Adar knows that your son, this is to Bronwyn, has what he needs to enact the power of a god.
Right.
Which at the moment I'm going with is to turn the Southlands to Mordor. That there is this sigil or depiction of what needs to be done, and it almost seems like it's the sword going through some form of sacrifice.
Right.
And whether then that will release a particular dark magic that will help create Mordor? I don't know. Yeah. But this watchtower has suddenly risen in importance.
It certainly has.
And it also is, when you look, even though they're saying it will take them 2 days to get there, they look relatively close. So, there's still time for someone to come to their aid. I mean, for me, this feels like this series version of Helm's Deep to some extent.
I could see that.
Defending the watchtower.
Yeah. That is kind of the difficulty here, isn't it? Because Bronn was trying to get all of the Southlanders to unite together and have this as their stronghold, and half of them left because of the pressure, I suppose, from Waldreg saying, look, we have an opportunity to get out of here, or we don't have to fight. All we got to do is give fealty to the new leader, Adar. We also got a bit of an answer to our question about the possibility of orcs living in sunlight in the future, didn't we? From the conversation with Adar and the orc, where he basically burns the flesh of the orc in the sunlight, saying, I wish you could feel it like I can. We will not have a sun here soon. The sun will be gone from here soon. So the lands of Mordor, no sun overhead in the future. So that's effectively what he's saying. So I thought that was kind of cool. That it
was a really good moment. Yeah, that sort of personal sort of reflection from Adar, definitely.
And it does connect him back to the elves as well, doesn't it? Because he sounds really regretful that he's going to have to sacrifice having the sun in the sky for the plan that they have in the future, for changing the world.
And which, given all the parchments in Númenor that Galadriel found, I feel Adar is working to that plan that has been written by Morgoth Sauron, in terms of this plan of creating a realm for evil.
Yes.
The other interesting thing was, to me in all of this was that actually Theo stays. You see Waldreg telling him to come, effectively.
This is our chance. Yeah.
This is our chance. And he stays. And then that he shows the hilt to Arondir and to Bronwyn, but also the words that the orc had said in the previous episode about, this is needed for my master.
Yes.
So I thought they were two kind of interesting things. We were talking about whether, Theo would be corrupted by this hilt. And, we see kind of like the self-scarring and when his blood gets into it. And that's why I feel there's a sacrificial element to this hilt. That it requires blood in order to get to its full form. We haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen its full form or its full power.
That's right, yeah.
But this is the hilt that everyone's looking for, effectively.
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe Theo isn't as predestined to a violent end as we thought in the past. Maybe he still is, but at least he's making the right moves here and, talking to his mom and talking to Arondir for help, rather than just going.
He's owned up to having the party, whilst the folks were away.
Exactly.
He's owned up to raising the drinks cabinet.
Yeah, and basically, if he'd gone off with Waldreg to Adar, it could have been him on the other end of the knife instead of his friend Rowan, who wasn't really his friend, who left him behind a few times. But it could have been Theo there,
definitely
being at the other end of the knife of Waldreg. So he's made the right choice, I think, for the moment. Anyway. Anything else about the Southlanders, John? Anything else about what's going on over there?
The only other interesting little point is that they do realize where they are when they realize that the orcs are moving against them. They do realize that they're in a watchtower that has a beacon. So when there's a final shot where you see the torches of the orcs as they're marching towards Osterith, and you see that I think that the beacon is lit.
Very good. I missed that. I saw them looking up at the tower and I was going, why are they looking up there? Why is the camera pointing up the tower? But I didn't notice the fire on the top of it at the end. That's very cool. So lighting the beacons of Osterith, to hopefully bring some aid from somewhere else on Middle Earth, which I presume is our tale 4, our final tale for this episode.
Yes.
Moving on to the Númenóreans, I guess, because that's hopefully the supporting army that's going to be cracking its way across the sea to the Southlands, hopefully in time to save the Southlanders.
Well, that's it. Like, I think what I really liked about this was that both Halbrand and the Númenóreans depicted through Kemen, Pharazôn's son, as well as Elendil's daughter, Erin, it's them weighing their destinies here. So, on the one hand, the Queen of Númenor, the regent Míriel, has ordered for this force to be brought together to go and help their Southland brethren. And yet, Kemen and Erin actually don't seem to want it to happen, even though you get that great scene with Kemen and his father, Pharazôn, where Pharazôn talks about, I quelled that protest, that disquiet, but it's not about going with the current, it's how you master the current. And that ultimately, Pharazôn is starting to see this as men in Middle-earth who will be indebted to the Númenóreans for the help that they have received. Yet, Kemen is still effectively adamant to try and scupper this expeditionary force by blowing up the ships. And then you have Elendil's daughter, who just, I guess possibly because she doesn't want to see her father and her brother Isildur go off, is this needs to be stopped. And it's the two of them coming together, possibly, that persuades Kemen to try and blow up the ships to stop this expeditionary force.
Yeah. So it seems like, and I'm when I watched it the first time, I wasn't convinced that I enjoyed this. Well, I didn't enjoy it the first time. This idea of putting that amazing moment at the end of last episode where you had the Queen Regent coming out and making her speech about we need to reach out to the world and people see these as portents of bad, but we can make them good and we can go out and do something positive. And then suddenly this episode, it was like, and here's all the barriers between you and the ships taken off. And then it felt like it was stuck in place, but it just made lots of sense the second time we saw the episode. The second time I watched it through, going,
because this is what you would face in a sense.
Exactly. You wouldn't be able to have, as a Queen Regent, particularly because she's not the true power. Her father has just been pushed out of the seat of power. She's taken over as Queen Regent. You would have lots of challenges from the people of the city to the idea of you taking them to war for the first time in a long time. I'm sure the seafarers, the group that go around protecting the seas around Númenor, I'm sure they've seen battles, seen fights protecting the land of Númenor, but they haven't gone out as a warrior race back to Middle Earth to join a big battle for centuries.
It's almost like they're being told to be Swiss. It's you're neutral,
Switzerland,
that
yes.
all the forces are to defend Númenor.
Yeah.
And, that's what there will be.
Yeah.
And here is that neutrality, at least for a long time, because they fought in the Great War against Morgoth, that is now coming back. So, I mean, you've had a significant period of peace and prosperity, but that now they're off to war. And I think ultimately those dissenting voices, that is normal. It's valid in that sense. Yeah. So I think it's really good that they just show that, the kink in the, right, we're all off and we're off going and there's no questions asked. Here we have Kemen asking his father why he's suddenly in favor of it, despite what he was saying the previous day in the square.
Yeah. And
he talks about mastering the current. Whereas I think for Elendil's daughter, it's a bit more personal. Absolutely. Because her brother, her father are going off into this war. Exactly. And she feels it will ruin her family, effectively.
By hook or by crook for Isildur, really. He's been kicked out of the Sea Guard. He keeps pleading to his father to give him the ability to get on board. He sneaks on board one of the ships, luckily, because he's the one that stops Kemen from burning the entire fleet, even though he accidentally burns down 2 of the ships. But he
covers for him as well.
He does cover for him and gets his place as a reward. Gets on board these ships to go out and go back to Middle Earth and fight in this battle. So Isildur was going no matter what. We kind of knew that because he has a historical place in these kind of battles. So we kind of knew he was going, but they certainly put lots of obstacles in front of him for sending him over there. But he's there on board, even though he's a bit of a deck swab. That's kind of his job, right?
Well, he's been put in the cavalry, so he thinks he's all high and mighty in the cavalry, but he is the stable boy, effectively.
Yes, exactly.
Which I liked.
Yeah.
I really liked as well Galadriel here, teaching the lessons on how to kill orcs to the uninitiated, effectively.
Yeah.
I thought that was a great little sequence with her dancing around, talking about, it felt almost, dare I say it, Game of Thrones with Arya and her swordmaster and Needle, where it's about a dance, it's about balance, it's not about brute force, swordcraft. Why use brute force against an orc, which will probably be 10 times stronger? Use them in the dance to get the advantage. Absolutely. I love that whole sequence with Galadriel. I thought it was really... It was really special, for sure.
Absolutely. And we heard, it did connect in with Arondir's training of Theo using the bow and arrow, this idea of they've had thousands of years to perfect their fighting style.
Yeah.
This isn't someone coming into battle for the first time or their first ever battle or they've fought for 2 or 3 years in battle. This is someone that's fought for 1,000 years or a couple of 100 years anyway. Yeah. We're not too sure of the actual age of Galadriel. Never ask an elven maiden her age, of course, but she's saying she's perfected her style of battle over such a long time and is now training these guys who know how to, stick it with the pointy end effectively, but she's training them in other skills and other styles and other ways of dealing with beasts that they may never have fought before. I really enjoyed this. And again, it does point to why Galadriel is such a good fighter that we've seen throughout the previous episodes. Once again, it's not just because she is a trained fighter. It's because she's a trained fighter that's been in battle for centuries, So, of course, she's going to be much stronger than 6 young men who've never fought in a battle before. And she's going to be able to best them really easily, the same way that she did with the guards last episode.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other side of this that I really like with Galadriel is her effectively using Halbrand, who doesn't know he's being used, but when he does, quite rightly, doesn't like being used. And I love where he turns to him and says, find another head to crown. This needs to have Halbrand there as the descendant of the king of Southlanders. And Queen Míriel, is adamant he needs to be there to give that weight to what's happening. And he's still being very reluctant. And you have this tension between the two. They have this great conversation where he says, you don't know why I left there. You don't know my reasons. You never asked. Galadriel talks about why she is so, like a dog with a bone, effectively. There's the vengeance, the sorrow of Galadriel and why she fights. And Halbrand is like, well, that's not necessarily, that's not going to bring your brother back. It's not going to help you. And she says hammer and tongs won't heal your scars either. Whatever he's trying to escape. So I really enjoyed this back and forth between Halbrand and Galadriel here. I think it really kind of exposed Galadriel's motives and brought it on a par with Halbrand as well, with him ultimately turning up in some quite nice armor that I never knew he had. Same with Galadriel, actually.
Well, yeah. There's a couple of things that go pretty quickly there.
Yeah.
I do wish they'd spend a little bit more time on the decision of Halbrand to go.
Agreed.
They make it really clear he doesn't want to, and he's fighting back against it, and he throws the runes that indicate that he is a descendant. He throws them on the table and walks out the door, and then you see his hand come back in, pick it up, and then
the scene isn't there. The scene that you're expecting where he's in the council chamber with Queen Regent Míriel and Galadriel isn't there. It was really odd. I have to say, it's the first time where I've kind of been like, this is odd.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless they're going to do it somehow in flashback, but I can't see it myself. So this felt really weird as to why it wasn't included.
I know it's an hour and 15-minute episode, and I know that you can't have every single scene in any show, but it just felt because they were building up this idea of him not wanting to go back, him taking a job in the guild.
Yeah, exactly.
We see that amazing sword that he's done. He's certainly got skills in the guild. I can see why they took him on board. But because he's so reluctant to go, you would expect it to have a moment where he makes his actual decision. You see it on screen, you have that conversation, because that's what this show tends to do, is show you those moments of the decision making and the discussions that get you there. And I felt like it just wasn't there on the screen for this episode.
It wasn't. It really wasn't him.
Like, why did he change his mind? I guess he changed his mind because he thought about it, but I wanted a little bit more.
Exactly. You wanted him to lay it out on the table and to be involved with that. And then, for Queen Míriel to say, let's prepare for war. And they go off and get the armor that has been created for them, rather than all of a sudden they're on horseback in full armor. I mean, they arrived in a boat after being shipwrecked at sea in effectively, like, Galadriel was in a nightgown.
That's right, yeah.
So, like, just that kind of stuff. I'm not saying I need to see the armor being sort of made or whatever, but, something. Because there was a real break there, and it kind of, that felt like a jarring omission.
It just felt unusual for this show. We've talked about a little bit about Lord of the Rings and the new House of the Dragon constantly skipping weeks and months and years to get them to the story they want to tell, whereas this show has tended to be relatively real time. You've tended to spend time with these characters. So you're wondering how long it would have taken someone to build Galadriel's amazing looking armor to perfectly fit her, when you haven't had elves there for a couple of hundred, maybe a couple of thousand years. So, well done. It does look amazing. The armor looks incredible. I'm looking forward to seeing her in battle when they do get over to the Southlands. Any other notes about the Númenorians, John, or any other notes about the episode?
And the only thing, again, really, really interesting is we have the Queen Regent with her father, the king, where he warns his daughter, don't go to Middle-earth. All that awaits you is darkness.
Oh, yes.
Really apocalyptic in what he is saying to his own daughter. So now we don't get anything more than that, really. But whether his time with the Palantir showed something else compared to what it showed to his daughter, who knows?
It's entirely possible. Yeah.
But in many respects, we know that to be true for the Númenorians. Given that they don't make it to the Third Age, then he's quite true here. I mean, I say, other than a scattering of Númenorians and their bloodline in and across Middle-earth.
Yes. Interesting one. Looking forward to seeing more of this when we get on to episode 6 of The Rings of Power. Overall, John, what did you think of this episode of The Lord of the Rings, episode 5, Partings?
I really enjoyed it. I'd give this 4.5 frostbitten hands out of 5. I really enjoyed all of this, to be honest. I think the main downside to it was, as you mentioned, just that kind of a mission of Halbrand coming into that suit of armor. There needs to be something other than him picking up the pouch that he's worn around his neck, and then all of a sudden he's on horseback in a pretty nifty bit of armor. But
it was like 12 weeks later.
I liked all the rousingness of it. I liked the fact that they make a point that not everyone is behind the Queen here, including, her Chancellor's son. I loved the continuation of Elrond and Durin, and just effectively Elrond having to come clean, really, about the deception that's occurred to him. Again, there was another really interesting moment here from Galadriel in this episode where she talks about her team mutinying, and then she was put into exile, or it was looked to put her into exile even by one of her closest friends, i.e. Elrond, which really just that mindset of how she perceived what was done to her. I thought that was really something additional to that from the earlier episodes. I think with Nori and the Stranger, again, I think that's just still keeping things in the mix, depending on where ultimately they are going. But it was nice to be back with the Harfoots. Yeah. And I think starting to understand a bit more about how Mordor will be created in the Southlands, the importance of this hilt that Theo found. Really good to have that start to be sort of the information on that peeled away. Interesting that Theo stayed and told Arondir and his mother about the hilt, but again, suggesting he's not suddenly just been taken by this hilt. There is a hope in the same way that you had with Frodo and the ring. Yeah. So, for me, 4 frostbitten hands out of 5.
Excellent.
Derek, what did you think of episode 5?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. There's lots of stuff that's going on there. Yeah, again, I'm glad that the Númenorian decision is now done and they are on the ships on their way now to Middle Earth. I'd hate if they stopped in the bay now to have another argument about whether they should go or not to delay them going. That's the only part of this episode I just felt like they could have done more things with, it felt like all the obstacles against them going, but there's some other great stuff in the episode. The battle between the Balrog and the elf over the tree above the Misty Mountain. I just thought how that was delivered, because it's something that's been committed to history by the elves, and they had that Gil-galad had Elrond recite the poem of that tale. I thought that was really interesting to have it done that way, because it felt like that kind of call back to something ancient, and it was delivered so well on screen. Love that. Really looking forward to the rest of these stories for the rest of the season. Another 3 episodes to go, and I think they've been doing a great job at, again, here setting everything in motion for where we're going to get to as the season goes on. I thought that they did a great job. Excellent stuff. Will we get on to some feedback from our wonderful fellow ringers, John?
Yes, definitely. Our first bit of feedback for episode 5 is an email from Victor Von Doom. Salutations, my lords. I find it amazing this story was conjured from Tolkien's notes and scribblings. I must say I really like the design of the Númenorian ships. It's nice to see Isildur patch things up with his mates. He best not blow it again, though. I think his father will put him to the test. To my mind, the stranger must be a wizard, but who were the pasty people tracking him? Previously arrived wizards? I found Galadriel's instructions to the troops quite enjoyable. Only Elendil truly knows with whom they sail to Middle-earth. She is amazing. And I'm always impressed when he and Galadriel speak Elven to each other. Hopefully Halbrand is fully on board with the mission. I can't wait to see him in a fully fledged battle. Will Pharazôn's plotting and machinations help bring about the destruction of Númenor? Kemen is severely misguided, and I think not so sharp. He should have ignored the stowaway instead of exposing him. He wasn't even thankful to Isildur saving him and creating the cover story. Seems like history is repeating itself with the Southmen. While Elrond has found himself in a hard place, I think his choice informs Durin solidly. I hope the prince can get this past his father. We are most fortunate to have such great storytelling here and across the platforms on the horizon. Take joy in it. Ande Tharasithil, Victor von Doom. Great stuff, Victor. Yes, I kind of agree with you with Kemen. I think,
He's misguided.
He is a bit misguided, and seemingly, if you're doing something sneaky and you think you might be blown by someone, then don't take off the sacking that's gonna, actually identify you with the stowaway.
Yeah.
Plus, as well, just with his interactions with Elendil's daughter, then it was that informing some of his decisions because she was so against it for personal reasons?
I think
or because I'm not entirely sure that it was because of his father, because his father was actually trying to work him round to his point of view about you need to see beyond the immediate and master, how things play out rather than react to how things play out.
Yeah, if there was one thing this season that felt Game of Thrones like, it was Pharazôn and his speech. That felt like something like, I'm the one who knows what's actually going on here, Kemen. Sit back, take notes, and you'll learn how to play the Game of Thrones, is what it sounded like from Pharazôn. But I think you're right. I think Kemen, he had said before he went to Pharazôn that his ears are never open to my words. So I think the reverse is true as well. It felt like Kemen's ears are not open to Pharazôn's words either. So even though he told him what seemed like a very convincing argument to let this go ahead, I think Kemen was totally set on impressing the girl that he's trying to date now. And maybe that's not the only reason, but it felt like that's part of the reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Great stuff, Victor. Thanks for the feedback.
Absolutely. Thanks, Victor. We also have a voicemail in from Dr. Bob Phillips again for episode 5.
Superb.
Well, episode 5. Cool. So, we are back in with our lovely little not hobbits and hearing all about their migratory lifestyle and the joy of they are not wolves. Those are seriously mutant beasts chasing them. But we do get to see some magic from Starman, which is very, very lovely. And it sort of illuminates the little faces of the hobbits, which aren't hobbits still, but they're gonna be, aren't they? Anyway, quite like that arc. And it sort of feeds into the other bits, which were full of sort of collaboration and collaborators and conspiracies and half-truths and little bits of not quite being honest with each other. Mm-hmm. All of that darkness throughout, and yet the dwarves and the friends through this seem to be able to negotiate those challenges that they are faced with. And that is coming through more strongly than it has done in the previous ones, I think. It still is a visual spectacular. It's amazing to look at. And this just isn't telly anymore, is it? We're seeing episodic films being produced on a scale of which you couldn't have dreamed of 5 years ago even. It is amazing to be in the middle of this bubble, but I do reckon it's going to crumple sometime soon. Anyway, I enjoyed that. It's a great way to spend the end of a Friday evening, and I hope that it suits your holiday when you get back. Lovely to speak to you all, and I'll speak again next week.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bob. Yeah, it was a great way to spend some time after we got back from our holiday watching this absolute visual spectacle. It's incredible how amazing this show looks, and I'll say it as well. The writing on the show has been fantastic. I'm absolutely loving the story and how it's building the way it's building. We know we've got 8 episodes for the first season, and potentially 5 seasons overall are coming for this show. But I also do wonder, will that bubble burst before the final episode is produced? They've already moved production from New Zealand to the UK for the next season, so I'm hoping they've done lots and lots of drones flying over the top of New Zealand to
they've mapped
photograph
New Zealand,
every single part of it from every single angle so that they can use it for the next season of the show. But it is absolutely gorgeous.
Well, I guess to give the mountains in inverted commas some height, but I mean, nonetheless, unless it's going to be then the next 4 seasons of Hobbiton, that would work. But yeah, for sure, it's just the spectacularness. I mean, as Bob said, the visual spectacular of this show, is quite incredible.
Yeah.
But
I'm glad it's being married with such good storytelling as well.
Exactly.
And such a great cast.
And great music.
Yeah.
Fantastic cast. It is really good. I mean, this is an epic story as well, and yeah, it does get intimate moments, but at its heart, it is epic storytelling of good versus evil.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So great stuff. Thanks for the voicemail, Bob.
Yeah, so great to hear from you, Dr. Bob. Hopefully we'll hear from you again for episode 6 of The Rings of Power. We did get another email in from Gail Cleary. She sent an email in to us at feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. She says, "Hi everyone. Well, this was a slower paced episode that focused more on character and future setup. It had some interesting themes, and the visuals, as always, continue to be impressive. The battle over the tree was a fantabulous standout, but most of all, the combination of music, visuals, characters, and dialogue finally feel like we have now fully arrived in Tolkien's Middle-earth. In fact, this feels even closer to the way I envisioned Tolkien's world than Jackson's films, which is astounding considering how excellent those films were. The first theme of this episode is either the innocence of youth or the folly of youth, depending upon the cynicism level of the surrounding characters. Nori confidently telling the stranger that he is not a peril is the picture of innocence. She doesn't know enough about the stranger to know whether he is a peril or not, but she's too innocent to know that and learns that lesson the hard way when inadvertently being hurt by his healing spell. The young people in Númenor naively believe that war can be stuffed back into the genie bottle. They don't understand how power and greed work yet. Those are currents we all have to learn to navigate. Isildur is suffering from the particular delusion of youth that insists a person needs neither experience nor specific training to be trusted with important tasks and succeed in them. I'm sure his being taken along to war is going to go splendidly for everybody. Finally, Elrond has no inkling that his innocent friendship with Durin was being exploited for the greater good. Luckily, he maintained just enough innocent optimism to be honest with Durin and trust his friend to agree to help. However, it is doubtful that Elrond is able to understand the lengths of Gil-galad has gone to, or is still prepared to go to, in order to save all the peoples of Middle-earth. Kingship comes with an extra helping of means justify the ends in this world. Even when characters act with the best of intentions, I fear we are going to find out exactly why dwarves hate elves so much by the Third Age. The second theme surrounds fate versus choice. Halbrand expresses that people of his kind are always fated to do terrible things, and his only choice is to stay away from the situation. The Southlanders indeed have to struggle with pledging loyalty to evil. Many see this happening because they are inherently bad and believe they deserve what happens to them. However, they all miss the point that when a greater force says comply or die, any meaningful choice is taken off the table. Identifying with your oppressor is a sad psychological outcome frequently experienced by people put in such terrible situations. It can keep them trapped in the cycle of self-hate for a very long time. Galadriel now grasps that her circumstances initially came from her choice as a younger sibling. She now understands that obsession eventually removed choice from the equation to the point that others viewed her as a danger. With any luck, she will now start the process of becoming more tolerable. The writers even take a potshot at the innocence of the audience. You are Sauron, aren't you? Yes, of course we are all guessing who Sauron is, and are all probably wrong, including me. You got us.
Great stuff.
Some final stray thoughts from Gail. She says, it appears that the mosquitoes in Canada came from Middle-earth. The wolves look like escapees from the Dark Crystal. The fiery cradle the stranger came out of looks a lot like an eye. Tar Palantir has the world's most convenient form of dementia. Don't go to Middle-earth because darkness. I guess we have to forgive one silly little plot trope per episode. Theo overcomes typical silly child syndrome and actually shows his mother and Arondir that scary key. I bet that opens the door to Santa's workshop. Probably not. So all the mithril jewellery the elves wear contains the light of the Valar and is acting as a literal form of life support for the elves in the Third Age. Now I understand why Elrond had a breakdown over Arwen giving Aragorn her necklace. By taking it off, she started the process of fading, dooming herself to dwindle until she became a fairy or a sprite of the current age. In the last war, entire continents disappear. Anybody else think it might have been epic to have gone back to the First Age and see that war? Give me the meat and give it to me raw. Durin missed the TV14 memo for this show. Disa is getting one fine table. Halbrand seems quite displeased to have taken a bath. It's almost like he knows what it does to the female fandom. And finally, a quote from Gil-galad: when all of the senses sleep, the eye of hope is first to awaken, last to shut. And a quote from Gail: hope is a fancy word for denial. Looking forward to the podcast, Gail. Thank you so much, Gail. Some great thoughts there about the episode and the show itself. I totally know what you mean. Watching this show, sometimes you suddenly feel you're in the world of Tolkien, and that's what the show is really attempting to do very well and is achieving for me, definitely on a weekly basis. I feel like I'm just sitting there, back reading the books of Tolkien, and I think these episodes have just done such a good job. These last two, particularly 4 and 5, have really done such a good job of fleshing out that world and allowing it to breathe more. And there's no criticism of Jackson's movies, that he did such a great job in all 6 movies. I'll say now, after watching the extended version of The Hobbits, I think all 6 of them have some great things about them. But of course, the Lord of the Rings trilogy being the better of the 6. But no criticism of him. There is no way you could have done this version of Tolkien in movie form.
Not at all. And really good with that theme breakdown, looking at, with the episode from the different side of the innocence of youth, versus, the whole theme around fate versus choice that we're so kind of linked into with the Aragorn storyline as well. And yes, a bit like yourself and with Dr. Bob, yes, they were some fairly sort of warped looking wolves. But I mean, this is wolves from the Middle Earth world, I guess.
Yeah. But it's supposed to be a mix of wolves and hyenas, apparently, is where the design point was taken from, which kind of makes sense, because hyenas are
scary
weird
as hell.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks so much for your feedback, Gail.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gail.
And thanks to everybody else who sent in feedback to us for this episode. One final piece of feedback over on Facebook.
Yes. Richard Blaze says, it was all right, better than last week's, but still nothing special just yet. Still by far the prettiest show at the moment, but the characters and scenes are becoming a bit too generic. Halbrand, not wanting to be king, suddenly decides he will be king and appears all regal immediately. I'm sticking with it in the hope it gets better, but it is feeling like a very, very watered down version of Tolkien's stories. Thanks, Richard.
Interesting.
We discussed it just before around Halbrand. There was certainly something missing there.
Yeah.
Whether it was a scene here, whether it was a bit more around him coming around, to wanting to be this kingly figure on horseback that we see at the end of it. And I mean, I think you're right. We got that development from Aragorn over over 3 hours worth of movies, effectively, at least with the extended cuts.
Yeah.
And at this stage we are on, 5 hours. So it's a good amount of time into it. So I can certainly see where you're coming from in that respect. For me, I think it's still kind of at least hitting the right pitch and points along this way.
I definitely think it is, yeah.
But also, just in terms of your point around feeling like it's very watered down, it is basically from his notes and scribbles, as Victor mentioned, to some extent. So,
well, effectively, and I know Richard has read Tolkien, like he knows Tolkien really well. It's written from the appendices, which are historical notes. It's just there's no narrative attached to them as such. There's some, it's just not that interesting to read. I suppose it's not like a story telling you this entire history of what's going on at this time in Middle Earth. It's taken from the notes in the appendices. So it's not just notes and scribbles, because actually Prime Video don't have access to those. They have access to only the appendices from Lord of the Rings, where they've built their story out of it. I don't think that it's a watered down version of Tolkien. In fact, I think they've done quite a good job of creating this story around it. But we were having a discussion, myself and John, once we watched the 2 episodes of The Rings of Power, that one of the interesting things about bringing something like Tolkien to life, particularly now when there's been a lot of fantasy movies that have been successful, and a lot of fantasy TV shows that have been successful, one of the difficulties with Tolkien is that because he started a lot of these things, and a lot of other fantasy writers have took them on board and changed and developed them over 40 or 50 years for whatever story they wanted to tell. Some things that Tolkien would have written or did write have become tropes because they are the basis of what other people, the straw man, I suppose, of what other writers have taken on board and built onto. So sometimes the idea of the big bad and people being corrupted and everybody being basically decently good unless they have a villain turning them to the dark side. A lot of that stuff has become tropes because so many other people have built their stories on top of that. So I do wonder if that's something that might be difficult for people that don't know Tolkien's writings. Wonder if that's something that might come across with Lord of the Rings. You certainly couldn't compare this show to House of the Dragon, as we've said before, which is, who's going to get stabbed in the back this week. It's not that type of show. While they're both fantasy, they're both very different types of fantasy. So I do wonder if it feels like watered down Tolkien, Richard, because there's so much other fantasy out there that feels like it was built on to Tolkien.
Yeah. I mean, I think as well with all fantasy, and it's to a large extent, it's with sci-fi, you have to build worlds in any fiction, even if it's just in a house, in terms of what happens there. Here, I think the epic visualness, I guess, of it is an attempt to build world. I mean, it must be a real struggle to get that balance on how deep you go in terms of the lore and different aspects here, and then the wide shot that you need to do that shows the world in which these people, these different races, live, and that, the higher level, broader look at, the suspicions and grievances between elves and dwarves, elves and humans, dwarves and humans, and so on. So that world building thing, I think, can be a real probably struggle in a world that expects TV of a certain type. Yeah, I guess ultimately, and by that I mean continually action filled and so on. That's why I don't think I would ever kind of demean that Vista setting, or a piece of action happening in that Vista, like with Arondir last week, saving Theo and his mum from the orcs coming through the forest. But nonetheless, I think valid points there, Richard. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Great to hear from you, and hopefully you'll stay on watching the show. Yeah. And hopefully it'll engage you a bit more in the next couple of episodes. Great stuff. Thanks everybody for your feedback on episode 5 of The Rings of Power. Please keep sending in your feedback to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, or pop on over to our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries. We are still covering lots of other shows on TV Podcast Industries, covering Marvel's She-Hulk, The Sandman on Netflix. Just a couple more episodes of those 2 shows to go. You can get all of those by subscribing to the podcast at tvpodcastindustries.com. But on this feed for The Rings of Power, Power will be back with episode 6 next week.
Yes, thanks so much, fellow ringers, for joining us for our episode 5 discussion. In the meantime, though, keep on with the Rings of Power and keep watching, keep listening, and keep sailing west.
Bye.
Bye.